Okay, so this is my take on The Emergence of Grammar, Systematic Structure in a New Language by Sandler, Meir, Padden, and Araonoff. So the paper starts off talking about the creation of new languages, including sign languages, under unusual circumstances. So because of this, they may not follow typical linguistic rule or structure. So I found this as an interesting idea to explore because it brings forth the questions of how every working language began and how they follow the rules and how they become complex in their own way, etc. So what exactly are the requirements for a language? I would think that this is a hard question to answer because every language is so different. So the language that the researchers first looked at was a sign language that was spontaneously created with no external influences. So to me, this seemed normal because it's probably the way that other languages start in the beginning. They don't have influences. They kind of just work their way around it. So the researchers had a similar hypothesis where because the users of this sign language were in a semi-isolated community with many deaf speakers, that there were no influences of other languages on the sign language that they use. More specifically, they looked at how the users of this sign language incorporated subjects, objects, and verbs. So in the study, they found that sometimes their sentences had subjects, objects, and verbs, but other times it would be missing one but not the other two. They also put subjects, objects, and verbs in all different orders in their sentences. So that's really different because most languages follow a specific word order, like SVO or SOV. Additionally, the users of the language used facial articulations, eyelid contractions, and eye gazes to help separate clauses and the ideas in their sentences. So in the end, they basically concluded that their sign language had no influence of other languages that the users may have been exposed to, and that the unusual word order was an independent development, and their hypothesis was right. So I stand with the paper's principal argument. A supporting argument that I can provide has to do with my knowledge of ASL, or American Sign Language. So I know at times, in order to refer to others, signers of American Sign Language will physically point to a space off to the side, and they also make facial expressions to get their point across. So it makes sense to me that the signers of ABSL, which is the sign language they studied in the paper, also use physical markers as part of their language. Other connections I made during the paper were from a linguistics class that I previously took. So I liked this article because I was able to extrapolate from the paper and apply this knowledge to the class, which was language acquisition. So, for example, there's a theory that children are born with a universal grammar, and basically they have this innate ability to learn and pick up language. And I think this paper really connected to that because in this article they talk about new spontaneous made-up language, yet it shows that it must have some type of meaning and connection to show how our brains work if they're able to pick it up and naturally understand grammar, word order, etc. on our own. So yes, that would be additional supporting evidence to the claim in the paper. And lastly, I've also been able to connect what I read in this paper to things I've learned in classes as a communication disorders major. In the intro class, we learned how being deaf can sometimes cause a delay in language learning, depending on factors like the decision to have a hearing aid, what age they get it, and if they're involved in deaf culture. So one question of mine that came up while reading this paper was if the hearing users of the sign language also use spoken language, like English, for example, or not, and how their knowledge of the languages they use have been affected by using a sign language that is dominant in the area they live in. But other than that, I think the article answered most of the questions about this language and how it was created, and I liked it.